Good morning. On this Saturday, we're going to look at Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. And it's the story of Jairus' daughter with an interruption. And, sometimes we don't like getting interrupted. We're busy doing something and something comes up that we have to take care of, and it's sometimes hard to get back to what we were doing. And most of the time, the interruption isn't very welcome. So before I start the story, I'm going to do an interruption. Tomorrow morning, have worship at 9 o'clock in Sutton. There is no worship at Our Savior's in McHenry tomorrow. We'll worship first and third Sundays of next month up in McHenry. But as we look at today's story, it starts, Jesus and his disciples have come across the sea again after being asked to leave the land of the Gadarenes. And, when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, it says a great crowd was gathered around him, and he was by the sea. And then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came by, and he came, and that one version of it where it said he came by, but it was a leader of the synagogue by the name of Jairus. Came intentionally. He didn't just accidentally happen to pass by. When I first read it, a man named Jairus came by. And I read it the wrong way because it wasn't worded that way. So it wasn't an accident that this leader of the synagogue came. Even though these leaders were watching Jesus, with a powerful microscope, if you want to put it that way. They were watching everything he did and listening to everything he said. But here is one of the leaders that has seen in Jesus a hope for a future for his daughter. His young daughter was sick, nearly to the point of death, is what he says. My daughter is at the point of death. Come lay your hands on her so that she might be made well and live. And that's a prayer we all have for our children, right? When they get a cold, when they get a flu, if they get infection in their ears, if they get whatever, our prayer for our children is that they would be made well and be made whole and live. And this leader of the synagogue probably went out on quite a limb, to come to Jesus because of the movement within the leaders against Jesus. So for one of them to come and seek Jesus out, it's just like when Nicodemus came in John 3. He was one of the leaders that came to Jesus to ask questions. But this Jairus comes with a plea for his daughter. In verse 24, so he went with him, and a very large crowd followed and pressed in on him. So it wasn't just Jesus and his disciples going down the road, but a crowd of people. And you know how crowds are. There's jostling and there's moving about, and you bump into this person and that person. But within this crowd, the story gets the interruption because there's this woman who has been to doctors for the last 12 years. She's been going to doctors to try to find healing. And she's spent everything she has, and she's at wit's end. She has nowhere else to turn. But she has seen Jesus. She has heard Jesus. She has witnessed what Jesus has done. And in her mind, she believes. She believes that just by touching the hem of his robe, just by reaching out and just touching him, that she would be healed. Now, think of that faith. That's the faith of a mustard seed that Jesus talks about in the parable. If I just touch him. And we can read in the Bible where it says, and many who just touched his clothing were healed, because the power emanated from Jesus. He had this about him, that they could see that in Jesus. And this woman had that faith. So she came up in this crowd and reached out intentionally to touch Jesus. And this is one of the passage here. Jairus says, come and lay your hands on my daughter, she may be healed. This woman reaches out and touches Jesus and is healed. And so the power of touch, we know what the power of touch is. to have a hug, to have a kiss on the lips or a kiss on the cheek or a handshake, you know. And I've shaken an awful lot of people's hands after worship, and there are an awful lot of different handshakes. Some, you know, they're just about crush your bones together. Some are just a nice, gentle, but yet firm grip. And some are just put their hand in yours, and there's no reciprocity. They don't close their fingers. It's just they stick their hand out. And so touch, there's a lot of ways of touch. And touch is one of the most important things, I think, for people. And there are tests that prove that for babies in an orphanage, if there is someone that holds them and rocks them and sings to them, talks to them, reads books to them, those babies thrive much more than one who is just left to lay there with no human contact. So touch is important. And but this woman's faith is so much that she if I just touch his clothing, and she does, and Jesus feels the power go out. Now, I'm sure that there were a lot of other people, as the disciples said, "Oh, come on, Jesus, you know, there have been all kinds of people bumping into us. I mean, what's the big deal?" Well, a lot of those other people that were just accidentally bumping into Jesus or accidentally touching their hand on his robe as he was walking didn't do it with the intent, with the faith, with the belief, with the trust that Jesus had that power. And Jesus felt the power go out. And you know, sometimes people will wonder, well, how could Jesus feel that power? Think about when you open a jar. You know, you got to work and you got to struggle. And when it comes, you feel that give. You feel that power is expelled. If you throw a ball, if you bounce a basketball, if you pick something up off the floor, pick your grandchildren up, you have exerted power and you feel that. So Jesus knew when this power had gone out from him. And he knew what had happened. He knew who it was before he even asked. Yet he stops. He stops, and the whole group stops. I mean, a few of them maybe took another step or two, but when they realized that Jesus stopped, the crowd stood still. I mean, that's, you know, the power had gone out from Jesus, and he stops, he turns around, and he asks, "Who touched my clothes?" You know, and the disciples just, you know, "What are you talking about?" And it says this woman came in fear and trembling. That's what this version said. To the woman, knowing what happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. The whole truth. She told him the story of how she'd been going to physicians for 12 years, how they weren't able to help her, how her bleeding, if anything, was just getting worse. There was no hope, no future. But yet she says to him, "I believe that if I was to touch you, if I was just to touch your cloak." She tells him the whole truth. She tells him what was in her heart, what was in her mind. She told him of her need. And do we do that when we come to God in our prayers? We hopefully we tell him the whole truth because he knows it anyway. But, you know, we come to God in prayer just, you know, sometimes in fear and trembling. You know, will God forgive? Does God forgive? I mean, man, I really messed up this time. But God is full of grace and mercy, and that is such an important thing to believe. To believe that when we come to God with this whispering voice we have, with our prayers, whether they're out loud or whether they're silent, and know that God hears them. So she tells them the whole truth. And you think about that. Think about Jairus standing there with Jesus. I mean, I'm sure Jairus is pretty close to Jesus because he knows the way to his home. So Jairus is listening. Doesn't he get impatient? Is he standing there, "Come on, Jesus, let's go. You know, my daughter." You know, I mean, are we like that? Are we like that? Yes, we are. But, you know, we want it, and we want it now. And if something else is going on, it's just like I said with this interruption. You know, you can be doing something, and another of your coworkers maybe comes and needs some help with something, and they ask, "Can you help me with this?" It's an interruption. You go and you help, and what you were working on waits. And sometimes, you know, if you're working with some customers that they want this project done and this project done, and everybody wants it at the same time. Hurry up, come on, let's go, Jesus. You got to think about Jairus. You got to think about Jairus' friends. You got to think about the disciples. I mean, come on, Jesus. Somebody just bumped you in the crowd. Let's just go and do this, let's go find this little girl. But Jesus listens to this woman's story, and he calls her daughter. I mean, if you look in the Bible, you look and try to find another place where Jesus refers to someone as daughter. A very personal greeting, very accepting. You're a part of my family, he says to her, daughter. You're included in my love and in my grace. And just then it says, while he was still speaking to Jesus was speaking, this daughter, your faith has made you well, go in peace, be healed. While he was still speaking to her, this interruption, some of Jairus' servants, someone comes, people from the leader's house to say, your daughter is dead. Bother the teacher no more. There is no hope. It's done. It's over. It's too late. Never too late for God. It's never too late for Jesus. And I've said that before, I'll say it again, that, sometimes in our churches, we wonder about someone who's never been to church. They don't do anything with the church, but all of a sudden they want a church funeral and da-de-da. Well, it's never too late to come to God. And I think rather than ever complain about such a thing as that, we should rejoice in that. But Jairus is listening to these people. And before Jairus can say anything, Jesus overhears, it says, verse 36, but overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. He's asking Jairus, this leader of the synagogue, to do the same thing as that woman did. Believe, to trust, to know. And then it says he allowed no one to follow except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And I think it's just an aside here, an interruption. I always think it's strange that they say John, the brother of James. Because James and John were sons of Zebedee. They were brothers. We all know that. But, that gets instilled in here so many times, that those two are, it's pointed out that they are brothers. But he comes to the leader's house, and there's a great commotion. There are people weeping and wailing. I mean, they had professional mourners, and when someone died, they gathered together to help the person help the people with their grief. And Jesus enters the house, and he says, why are you making such a commotion? This girl is just sleeping. And they know she's dead. I mean, someone was there, a doctor, someone was there, and this girl is no longer breathing. Her heart is no longer beating. And Jesus says, they laugh at him. They laugh at him. You don't know anything. But Jesus puts him outside, goes into her room, and the Bible, it says Talitha Kum. Those two words are in the Aramaic language that Jesus would have spoken, so that they don't change it to little girl arise. I mean, some do, but, Talitha Kum is basically what it means. I guess is little girl get up. That's what they translate it right here for us. And it says immediately she began to get up and walk about, and she was 12 years of age. Now, the woman had been bleeding for 12 years. And this girl was, just 12 years old. Does the number 12 have any significance? I don't know. But this woman, she'd been bleeding for 12 years, had this problem for 12 years, had been going to the doctors, and she was, at what point of her life? She'd been living quite a few years. But this young girl at 12 years of age was just beginning her life. And Jesus gives that life back to her. So she began to walk about, and they were amazed. And here, as again, he tells them to go and tell no one. Make sure no one knows about this, but give her something to eat. So much different than what the demoniac was told. Go and tell the people what Jesus has done. But we know the story, so they told. And that's what we are to do, to tell the story of God, tell the story of Jesus and his love each and every day.